Not too close. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be here today with you, along with this panel of distinguished Flannery O'Connor scholars, to talk about a subject that is near and dear to all of our hearts, Flannery O'Connor. My name's Angela Alaimo O'Donnell. I'm a poet, writer, scholar, and professor at Fordham University in New York City, and I also serve as the associate director of the current Center for American Catholic Studies. Our panel today is entitled Flannery at 99, and it's part retrospective and part predictive. As many of us know, Flannery's centenary is coming up on March 25th, 2025, next year. She will be 100 years old. Appropriately enough, Mary Flannery O'Connor was born on the Feast of the Annunciation, so we'll have two things to celebrate that day. So in anticipation of that great event, we thought it would be interesting to review some of the history of scholarship on Flannery O'Connor, and to discuss our own recent contributions to O'Connor studies, and finally to look ahead to potential developments, what we see coming down the road in terms of what scholars will be talking about and thinking about in the future. So we'll proceed this way. I'll offer an overview of the developments in O'Connor's scholarship, as well as talk a little bit about her presence in the popular imagination, and to establish a kind of a foundation for our conversation, and then I will turn it over to my fellow panelists. So let me introduce each of them to you first. Amy Alznauer is the author of The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor, a marvelous book. If you have not seen it, you must get it. It's so beautiful. It was a New York Times Best Book of 2020, and she is one of the curators for the exhibition At the Crossroads with Benny Andrews, Flannery O'Connor, and Alice Walker. Amy teaches mathematics at Northwestern University and is working on a YA novel, which is forthcoming in 2026. Kathryn Laborde is a professor of English at Xavier University in Louisiana. She's the author of the brand new book, Flannery O'Connor's Manhattan, from Fordham University Press. The book, by the way, is part of Fordham's Studies in the Catholic Imagination series, which I am very happy to edit, and we're thrilled to have Kathryn's book, to have helped Kathryn's book come out into the world. She is currently going back to creative writing nonfiction, and also writing essay and in drabble form. Our fourth panelist is Farrell O'Gorman. Let me say first that we're very grateful to Farrell for joining us at the last minute. Our fourth panelist was supposed to be here, our friend and colleague Jessica Wilson, but at the last minute she was not able to come, so Farrell was very kind to join us today. Farrell is professor of English at Belmont Abbey College, and since April of 2023 is the co-executor of Flannery O'Connor's literary estate. So obviously it's great to have him on our panel in terms of looking ahead to what sorts of things might be coming down the pike. His books include Catholicism and American Borders in the Gothic Literary Imagination and Peculiar Crossroads, Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy, and Catholic Vision in Post-War Southern Fiction. He also publishes articles on other contemporary writers such as Cormac McCarthy, Richard Rodriguez, and Tobias Wolff, and does creative writing as well, and that has appeared in magazines such as Image, Shenandoah, the Gettysburg Review, and elsewhere. So I am really delighted to have these four panelists here with me today. So I'll start by taking a look at a couple of these slides. This is a very quick snapshot of O'Connor's scholarship. There are a couple of sources on this, and they don't come immediately to the present. One goes from 1975 to 2000, the other comes up to 2017, but roughly there are over 100 books, over 100 biographies and criticism that have been produced since before 1975. There are 1,725 articles, chapters, and essays on O'Connor, 2,189 foreign studies, not in English, 2,016 dissertations, and 2,711 master's theses. When you compare this to work done on a comparable excellent writer like Eudora Welty, it's nowhere near these numbers. You know, she has these tremendous numbers, and obviously is a tremendously popular writer for people to focus their time and imagination on. So that's a quick kind of sampling of the sorts of things people have written about. That's the stuff that's in black are the things that at the very beginning, when people were assessing O'Connor's career after she died in 1964, they were writing about O'Connor's craft and style, about the genre that she writes in. Is this romance? Is this comedy? Is this some sort of drama? O'Connor, of course, as a Southern writer, O'Connor as an American writer, O'Connor as a Catholic writer, O'Connor on the subjects of violence and grace and sacramentality, those very Catholic subjects that a lot of critics like to focus on, and also O'Connor and the Bible. More recent studies, the ones in gold, are studies in which we're trying to figure out exactly how to read and how to teach O'Connor. How do you bring her into the classroom? How do we understand her, a different generation of readers than those who have come before? People have also written on O'Connor and gender. O'Connor and the family is a popular topic as well. Obviously, O'Connor and disability, given the fact that she suffered from lupus for the last 14 years of her life and had to deal with disability every day. And of course, disability figures in many of her stories. And so that's a terrific and very rich topic. O'Connor and embodiment, this is sort of related to this, and the idea of O'Connor as an incarnational writer is also a popular topic. O'Connor and politics is also very interesting in terms of the politics of her own time, post-World War II world that she is writing in, and also the civil rights, all of the things that the world is boiling and roiling, as we know, just around the time that she died, and how do we see her in relationship to those seismic events that are going on. O'Connor and cultural studies, O'Connor and technical studies, and eco-criticism, which is kind of interesting. And then last, O'Connor and race. So this just kind of gives you an idea of the sorts of things that people have been writing about and thinking about. The landmark texts, of course, are her novel Wise Blood, published in '52, The Violent Bear It Away, 1960, and The Complete Stories, which came out in 1971, 31 stories. And O'Connor won the National Book Award in 1972. It was the first time a writer ever won that National Book Award posthumously for the Complete Stories that was published by Robert Giroux. And after that, then come two very important books by Sally Fitzgerald and Robert Fitzgerald, who of course were dear friends of O'Connor, Mystery and Manners and The Habit of Being. And what was interesting about the Mystery and Manners is a collection of essays and talks that O'Connor gave over time, and The Habit of Being are selections of O'Connor's letters that were in the archives. And what became interesting to critics after this is it becomes very evident how important Flannery's Catholicism is to her fiction. And that starts a whole new wave of conversation about, well, do you have to be a Christian in order to understand Flannery O'Connor? Or even do you have to be a Catholic? Are there other ways of reading the stories without reference to that worldview that she obviously has? So that kind of changed the direction of criticism when those books were published. Another very important treasure trove that is available to scholars is the Georgia College Archive and the Emory University Archive. The documents that were given by the Flannery O'Connor Trust to Georgia College in 1970, there are over 7,000 pages of manuscripts, plus films, tapes, photos. So if you want to do O'Connor research, that is a great place to go. And then also Emory University has a number of O'Connor's papers as well. They stretch from the time of the papers from the 1930s throughout her life. There's correspondence, over 600 letters, writings, artwork, adorable cards she used to make for her father for his birthdays, journals and notebooks, photographs, slides, negatives, and there are also objects, Flannery's glasses, some of the hypodermic needles Flannery used in order to take the cortisone shots she had to take every day, which are housed in these little boxes, almost like relics. So it's very interesting to have access to those materials. So researchers have had access to these archives and have produced important additions to O'Connor scholarship, biographies, collections of letters, editions of her journals, editions of unfinished manuscripts, and critical books. Beyond the academy, beyond scholarship, O'Connor shows up all the time in fiction. We just heard a terrific couple of papers yesterday, and maybe some of you were there, in which the writers George Saunders, Toni Morrison, and Bruce Springsteen were discussed as being tremendously influenced by O'Connor's fiction. William Kennedy certainly is, Joyce Carol Oates, Alice Walker, Kim Guttrow. I just discovered Kim Guttrow's amazing story called the title just went out of my head. I'll remember it later. But it basically takes up the story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, like what happens to Julian after that. So it's really fascinating. It was published in the New Yorker a number of years ago. And also in this lovely book by actually a former student of mine, Francis and Bernard. It's a series of invented letters supposedly exchanged between Flannery O'Connor and Robert Lowell. So people really kind of love to tell O'Connor's and retell O'Connor's stories in imaginative ways. O'Connor in film, some of you may have been. I'm curious how many were here yesterday at the panel on Flannery in film. Okay, a few people. A fantastic documentary has been made by Elizabeth Kaufman and Mark Bosco called Flannery. It was shown as a PBS American Masters documentary. It won the Ken Burns Documentary Award, so it is fantastic. You can stream that on a number of different platforms. Her work has inspired films rendering her fiction and her life, including famously John Huston's Wise Blood, shorter films that are dramatizations of her work, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, The Circle and the Fire, and The Displaced Person. She hated The Life You Save May Be Your Own because they changed the ending to make it a happy ending, but she was happy that they did it because she earned enough money from it to buy herself and her mama a refrigerator. So that went okay. And then, of course, most recently, just this year, Ethan Hawke's Wildcat came out. And in film, O'Connor shows up also in the kind of storytelling techniques that many directors use, including Martin McDonagh, Quentin Tarantino, and the Coen brothers. She shows up in music, of course, because great art inspires more great art. Most famously, Bruce Springsteen says before the Nebraska album, he was reading Flannery O'Connor's stories, and the darkness of a lot of these stories, the darkness of vision that she gets at sin and redemption in ways that no other writer does, he began to write songs that were inspired by O'Connor. Other musicians, Sufjan Stevens, U2, Nick Cave, Tom Waits, and most recently, Colin Cutler, who is here in the audience with us, who will be performing tonight at 10 o'clock. Fantastic songs that are based on Flannery's stories and Flannery's world. And there's a wonderful new book that just came out by Irwin Straight called Flannery at the Grammys, which details a lot of the ways in which O'Connor's work gets into music. And then O'Connor also shows up on the stage. Karen Coonrod, the fantastic dramaturg from Yale University who lives in New York, received permission from the Trust a number of years ago to be able to stage a number of O'Connor's stories, including Everything That Rises Must Converge. And she's been doing that with her company, Compagnia de Columbari, for a number of years now, and now they're working on Revelation, which is going to very soon be released or premiered, and we hope to have that actually at the London conference on O'Connor, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So now I'll just say a few things about my own contributions recently, which is something each of us are going to do to O'Connor's scholarship. After many years of teaching O'Connor's work and thinking about her, as a writer, thinking about her from a professor's point of view, I was invited to do this prayer book based on the prayer practice of Flannery O'Connor. And rather than thinking about her just as a writer, I was able to accompany her as a fellow Catholic and a fellow pilgrim, a traveling companion on our shared journey towards eternity. And in the course of that project, I was praying with Flannery every day, and it was really a beautiful way to kind of develop an intimacy with this writer. Another project that allowed me to develop an intimacy with her is this book, Andalusian Hours. I embarked upon a 2-year-long project of writing 101 poems in the voice of Flannery O'Connor. Her voice had been in my head for many years, and I wanted to get it out and onto the page. So I would start my morning writing, as most poets do, and I would read a passage randomly from O'Connor's work. And as we all know, Flannery says the darndest things. And so I would use that passage as an epigraph to sort of get the poem started and then speak it in her voice. And they're all sonnets, and it was very fun and very challenging to try to get Flannery's Southern idiom inside of the courtly sonnet, and it also taught me the interesting ways in which the sonnet is a very flexible thing.
Did it work?
Did it work?
Did you get her voice out of your head?
No. No, it did not work at all. And weirdly, the book is published. It's done. It's 101 sonnets. More sonnets keep showing up, more Flannery sonnets, so I don't know what I'm going to do with those. But she has a way of doing that, doesn't she? Getting under your skin, and you just can't let her alone. But thank you for asking. My other project that I really enjoyed was this biography of O'Connor, Fiction Fired by Faith. I was invited by the Liturgical Press to write this book specifically for the Catholics in the pews, for people who might not know anything about Flannery O'Connor, but have heard her name, and they want to know, like, so what is it with this interesting Catholic writer, and what does that have to do with being a writer? And the book is basically, it's very short. It's about her vocation and her struggle trying to align these two vocations that she has. So the book was really, again, a joy to write because it gave me a chance to spend time with Flannery as a person and the different phases. We tend to think of the full-blown Flannery O'Connor when we think of her, but of course she was a child, and she was a child who lost her father young, and she was a person who struggled with her vocation, as most people do. So the biography was a really great opportunity to get to know her even better. And then finally, my most recent project, which I talked a little bit about yesterday, but I don't think a lot of people were there, so I'll spend a few minutes talking about radical ambivalence. This project was something that actually got started because as I was teaching O'Connor in the classroom, I've been teaching her in the classroom for many years, many decades, and the students are different now than they were many years ago in lots of different ways, but in one of the ways that they're different is they're very, very interested and very sensitive to the way that O'Connor would represent race and African American characters. And so the conversations were just very, very rich and very deep, and I was thinking, I don't really know enough to be able to authoritatively field the kinds of questions that my students were asking. I wasn't all that thrilled with my 7th chapter on race in the biography that I'd written. So I thought, oh, well, there must be a book on Flannery O'Connor and race, and I looked, and there was none. There were a few chapters here and there, essays here and there, because people have been talking about this since the 1970s, so it's not new. But nobody really did the deep dive. Also, one needed to go to the archives for this, because there were a lot of letters that are in those archives that are not in Sally Fitzgerald's collected letters. And it's kind of surprising what one finds when one goes there. Lo and behold, I found letters that contained very clear evidence that O'Connor had inherited this cultural racism that was part of being white in the South during the 1950s and the 1960s. And she's trying hard to shake it, but it's very much a part of who she is. And this, of course, was very troubling to me because no one likes to see their hero, their own, handwriting, saying things that you just wished never came out of her mouth or ever came out of her pen. So this was troubling to me, and I knew, of course, when I discovered all of this that I was going to have to let the news be known. I was very fortunate to get the permission from the trust, by the way, to publish these excerpts from her letters because previously Regina, Flannery's mother, would not let Sally Fitzgerald publish them because she was trying to protect her daughter's reputation. Very understandable. But fortunately, they did give me permission and I was able to publish the book. Unfortunately, the book appeared in June of 2020. 3 weeks, no, not even 3 weeks, like 2 weeks after George Floyd was murdered. So everybody, of course, you remember what it was like in June of 2020. Everybody was psychotic because of COVID, right? We had all been locked up. Our country was changed in ways that we're still trying to get over. And then, of course, there was this horrible, very public lynching of George Floyd that we could not ignore anymore. As we know, murders, unjustified killings of African Americans have been going on for a very long time, but it had not been caught on film. So there was no way for us to ignore that this was happening. So people really didn't want to hear that Flannery O'Connor had these racist tendencies in the midst of all of this. So the timing of the book could not have been worse when it came out, even though I had been working on it for a couple of years previous to that. So anyway, another thing that also happened, which brought the book to a lot of people's attention, is there was an article in the New Yorker that some people might remember called, with the fantastic title of How Racist Was Flannery O'Connor, which of course was immediate clickbait. Everybody went to it immediately. And what happened in that book, in that article, is that basically the writer takes O'Connor to task for her racism. And he is somebody who, by the way, had written previously on O'Connor, and in some ways, I think, felt that he needed to backpedal a little bit because he didn't want to be seen as justifying her racism. So basically what he did is he reviewed the book, but in it he accused me basically of making excuses for O'Connor, which is not true. If you read the book, you realize that that's not the case at all. I wouldn't have written a book if that was my intention. But what happened was this immediately then went viral, as they say, and on Twitter, half of the people were denouncing O'Connor. I'll never read her again. She's dead to me. The other half of the people were saying she's not a racist. This is not possible, and making excuses. Whereas, of course, the truth lies somewhere in between. The article had failed to carefully contextualize O'Connor's statements in her life, and provide the necessary critical background that is very much needed. The writer of the New Yorker article also did not mention the fact that she herself was on a journey towards understanding her own racism, and trying to come to terms with it. So, and also O'Connor died in 1964 at the height of the Civil Rights Movement at the age of 39. If she had lived to a ripe old age and seen all the things that would transpire, she certainly would have changed her views. So it didn't give her any quarter at all. It was really a kind of a very unkind article. I think all of us, well, I know all of us felt that way. Amy wrote an amazing piece in the Bitter Southerner, like just taking him to task. Jessica, who's not here with us, also did the same thing, which she published in First Things. So there was this outpouring, this outcry that you really can't treat O'Connor this way. Those pieces have survived much better than this particular article. Unfortunately, though, if you Google Flannery O'Connor racist, this is the first thing that comes up, rather than those pieces, or rather than a book that deals carefully with it. And just basically, I should say that the argument of the book is that O'Connor was working out her racist tendencies in the stories, and she was exposing white racism and the ways in which it's so soul-destroying in her characters. And so she obviously knows, because who knows the workings of a racist's mind better than somebody who suffers from it herself, and is very able to deconstruct it and represent it in a way that is extremely powerful. This is why the book is called Radical Ambivalence. She feels strongly both ways, and the stories, though, are the place that we go in order to really see what it is that she is believing and thinking about race. They are prophetic, actually, in many ways. So this is kind of brings us to where we are now, 4 years later. Jessica's not here today, unfortunately, but I just wanted to say a word or two about her project, which is brand new. It just came out. Why Did the Heathen Rage? In the archives, Jessica found, it's been there for a while, people knew that it was there, about 350 pages of an unfinished novel that had never been published in O'Connor's life. It was a very tough job for her to do, because a lot of it is just the same scenes written over and over again. It was not nearly, in a finished state. But Jessica worked on the project for a number of years. And so what is the subtitle of this book is, look at it closely, a behind-the-scenes look at a work in progress. So it's an interesting kind of construction of, this is what it's like to go into the archives, to find all these manuscripts, to try to piece them together in some way, and try to predict where it was O'Connor was trying to go. So that's a kind of and also this book, O'Connor is dealing with race in very interesting ways. So it's interesting how the sort of reawakening of the subject of race, which had lain dormant for a very long time, in 2020 is giving birth and giving rise to other projects, because this is obviously something that's very important to us and something that's going to be with us for some time. So basically, what it comes down to, from my perspective on this particular subject, is that it's in the stories. We have to go to the stories and see what it is that O'Connor is doing in order to understand. I also think that we're in a better place because people are not as our culture is not quite as on fire as it was in 2020, and now that all of these statements are out there, people are figuring out how to deal with them, without kind of losing their minds over it. So it's a conversation that's going to be here with us to stay. And the last question that I would like to address here is that people ask the question, well, is it possible to have racist thoughts and tendencies and write stories that are anti-racist? And the answer is yes. Just like Mrs. Turpin in Revelation says, how can I be a hog and me both? Well, you know, we all are. We're all good people, but we are also sinners. This is kind of news that, the stories that she writes on race are prickly and difficult and challenging. This is news that we don't really want to hear, but it is important news that we really need to hear. At this point, this is my attempt to kind of cover the last 99 years quickly. And now my colleagues on the panel are going to talk about their current projects. So please welcome Amy Alznauer to the podium.
All right, see if this actually works. Give me a second. Oh, here it is, sorry. Yeah, I think so. Let's see.
Yep. It's there. Oh, there it is.
There we go. Okay. All right, can you hear me? All right. So I wanted to just give you a tiny bit of background about me and my engagement with the archives to start out. So it began back in 2015 when I was doing the research for the book, The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor. I went to the archives just in search of the girl that Flannery was. I wanted to see what her imagination looked like, and I had no idea what I would find. But there is an incredibly rich collection of her juvenilia at Emory in particular. There's a little bit at GCSU as well. So it started there, and I started pitching this exhibition to Emory on her juvenilia, but eventually it became quite a large project with 6 different curators on the work of Flannery O'Connor, Alice Walker, and Benny Andrews. But I just quickly wanted to draw your attention to my co-curator for the Flannery material, Rosemary McGee, who is not here, but she was actually the person who acquired the collection for Emory, and she and I are now collaborating on a book that we hope to bring to publication, titled Imagining Flannery, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Girl. And I imagine that was actually the working title I had for the exhibition of her juvenilia a long time ago. I thought of it as not only us imagining Flannery, but Flannery as an imagining being. So what I'd like to do is take you into some of my fascinations. This in no way is going to be a full look at the archives, which, as Angela said, are vast, but more a look at some of the things that I have really found fascinating and I think could really give rise to some interesting research and inspire some art. So a North Star for me in thinking about her juvenilia is this passage from the grotesque in Southern fiction. So she writes, a novelist will have to descend far enough, and I always want to say into herself, because she's writing about her art, far enough into herself to reach those underground springs that give life to her work. And eventually she concludes this passage with, this is the beginning of vision. And if you know O'Connor's work, you know if there's anything that is characteristic of pretty much all of her nonfiction and her fiction is this emphasis on vision. So I want to take you through 4 sort of disparate sections, loosely connected. The first is really the sites of the archives themselves. So this first section, the attic and the archive, the most recent site of memory is the house on Green Street, which was the Klein mansion. It was her mother's family's mansion, eventually became the Florencourt residence. And this is where Flannery moved when she was 13 years old from Savannah to Milledgeville, where she lived with her parents. And I want to draw your attention in particular to this room at the top of the house. I learned, maybe other people knew this sooner than I did, but I recently learned that when she was living in this house, she set up an art studio in the attic. And here she is, a photograph from the Emory archives at 13 years old. One of the treasures, I think, in the Emory archive is this transcript that actually details that passage from Savannah to Milledgeville. So the first part is where she's at the Sacred Heart School in Savannah, and now she's moved to Milledgeville, and under special abilities and needs, it says a little bio for Flannery. plays accordion, raises quails, writes very original stories and poems, draws well, needs special help in speech, in spelling, and in sentence structure. And then on the other part, it's about how she has failed to play well with her peers and is making progress. So back to the attic, one of the things that, so there's items in this attic that aren't yet part of a collection. Rosemary, I think, was there with Farrell, so I think he might say a bit more about this. But they took some pictures, we're going through these materials, and one of the things that I would have dearly loved to have for the exhibition were these paints. I searched the Emory archives for this, but these are some of her watercolors and paints that she was using there. Another image that I just absolutely love is this detail of an eyeball. She actually, that big pink area, she labels correctly the vitreous humor. I'm sure she was copying the spelling down correctly. And this is actually the part of the eye that can clarify vision, but also create those floating specks, so the little specks in the eye. So I love that she has this sort of scientific look at the faculty of vision. Second area I want to talk about is artistic obsession, which is actually going to bring us back to this attic. I love the idea of obsession in all sorts of fields. Angela mentioned that I teach math. In mathematics, number theory is the purest. That was the area I studied in grad school, and it's the purest of all mathematics. For years, the number theorists prided themselves on doing something that was beautiful, and they did it for the sake of the truth and the beauty and the surprise of it, and it was never sullied by application. But then, of course, number theory became the underpinnings of the computer revolution. So you see this in art as well, and it's something that I think about all the time with children, is that their obsessions begin in a way that is maybe humorous to adults or seems trivial. So one of the obsessions that I love in the archives is her incredible obsession with hats. So this first image is actually from the GCSU archives. All the rest are from Emory. And so I put together this gallery of hats. This first line is all from when she was very young, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. They're on birds, they're on farmers, they're on girls. And here you see them going on. And this is a small fraction of the hats that we could put forth. In this attic, some of the images that Rosemary sent me provide another 9 hats. There probably are more up there. And again, if we looked at the full pictures, they're also delightful, and you can sort of see her eventual characters in these images. But what I love is the obsessive quality of this study in hats. Because, of course, eventually this thing that wasn't articulate yet in her life, this thing that she just found immensely humorous and in some sense revealing of the people around her, and wouldn't have talked about it in any sort of larger symbolic way when she was that age, eventually comes to play such an important role in her fiction. There's, of course, the Misfits hat. There's the hat that the prophet, the old man, wears, and Tarwater's hat, that play important roles in The Violent Bear It Away. And then, of course, most profoundly, there's the hat at the center of the story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, which was at the center of our exhibition. Because of the artistic gathering that came around the story. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But here we see Benny Andrews' rendition of that hat, first on the mother, the white woman that will board the bus, and eventually on the black woman, the same hat. And the hat becomes the vehicle of transformation in this story. But I love that that hat starts out in her childhood with this obsessive quality. So that, I'm going to use that to transition to the third section on O'Connor and race. But I just want to say one more thing about this artistic gathering around Everything That Rises Must Converge. It's really quite an artistic miracle of sorts, because not only do you have this story that O'Connor wrote, but you have these illustrations that Benny Andrews did, and then the beautiful afterword he wrote about why he chose to take this project on. But finally, you have a short story by Alice Walker titled Convergence, where she actually responds in fiction to this story, offering what she calls the other part, or the other half of the story. So, okay, one of the frustrations I have in the discussion about O'Connor and race, and Angela's book is a huge and beautiful exception to this, but my frustration in particular with the article that Paul Eli wrote was the incredible lack of engagement with the archives. The only engagement he made was via Angela O'Donnell's book without quite enough attribution even to the work that she did. So I just wanted to give you a sampling of the kind of holdings the archives have that really are fascinating in thinking about O'Connor and race. Again, all of this, or actually all of this that I'm going to show you is drawn from her juvenilia. So here we have sort of a schema of her world, a map of her world. She has drawn a house, a door, what she calls a winder, a family. But in that first column, she has a figure there that she titles Black. And now we have a family portrait with her holding a doll, and you might think, well, somebody just gave that to her for this one instance, for this photograph, this racist Pickaninny caricature doll. But there's lots of images of her carrying this doll around. It was a favorite plaything of hers. And here she is at a family picnic, being led around, probably at around age 13 when she made that transition, being led around by a Black farmhand, probably about her age. So we get a real sense of the misbegotten education of her childhood. Again and again, we see images like this, drawing on probably her doll, but bringing with it lots of other racist stereotypes. Later on, the archives, again, Emory Archives, have images probably from her college class, these studies in charcoal, which have at least moved beyond, in some sense, caricature. I could say a lot more about that, but I'm going to keep going. These are just quick images of some of the letters that Angela brought forth in her book, and Monica Miller actually brought forth another set of them. I think there's one from each group in her Iowa letters that her Dear Regina book. But I wanted to mention this, and I'm not going to have time to share this with you, but I just want you to know it's there. So in a letter to Betty Hester, I believe this is in Habit of Being, she talks about her plan to read A Good Man is Hard to Find at the University of Chicago, and she says that she's planning to omit the racially offensive paragraph. She says, I can write with ease what I forbear to read. And I know these little icons are going to make you think I'm about to play this. We don't have time right now, but you can listen to these. They're publicly available in the Emory Archives. The first is this actual reading at the University of Chicago where she carries through with her plan. But I think in a fascinating pairing, 2 months later, now back in the South from the University of Chicago at Vanderbilt, she does another reading in which she bears to read it. She reads it as it was written. All of this, I think, shows an awareness of some people accuse her of not being aware, or they try to excuse her for not being aware, but you see that she is very much contending with the offense of this language in her lifetime, in her day. The last thing I want to mention are two stories that I am just blown away by. One is called Frizzly Chicken, and the other one is White Girl. Both of them are unpublished stories from her early days in Iowa, and both of them are thinly veiled autobiography. You can find all of these references, including names, moments that are detailed in the biographical literature on her. So we can match these stories up with her own life. And both of them, there's a beautiful passage by Toni Morrison about O'Connor where she says she shows with profound perception the process of othering the stranger. And here you see that exact process taking place in her own life. And I just wanted to read you the tail end of the one on White Girls. It's sort of a playground drama, playground power dynamics are going on with these children. There's a group of Black children, there's the main character, and then there's a newcomer, a white girl from the north. And the very last paragraph is the white girl really distancing herself from everyone. And she says, so the Black girls at some point call them, the two white girls, they call them white girls. And she says, white girls. Murtis thought of little skinned animals huddling together to cover themselves up. Geraldine looked like a skinned animal. She thought of herself and Geraldine huddled together, shivering without their clothes. White girls. No, you won't, she screamed. You get away from me. This is my porch. So again, such a awareness of her own upbringing, what she was educated into as a child, and would really provide the thinking behind her eventual stories, that so many of which deal with racial prejudice. Okay, last section. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but this is sort of, I think, the heart of what I have taken out of the archives. It's the story that I've come to feel is really O'Connor's Underground Springs, and has really given me a much deeper relationship to her story, and also to that process of being a child and going forth into your life, and the riches of your life really springing from that background. So very quickly, the background for this story, which centers around 1941, is this little family trio. Her mother says, "Hold up your head, MF, and you were just as bad, Ed." And he says, "How thoughtful." And she responds, "I was reading where somebody died of holding up their head." And this is age 9, and notice the father, notice his shape in particular, and notice that she's smiling. And I just wanted to quickly share this. Her father was her greatest friend. He was her greatest fan. He and she were sort of partners in crime and all the jokes. He wasn't like her mother, wanting her to be a proper Southern lady. But here we have that same parade, and I think this is probably age 13. It's undated, but the parade is turned around. You can see that Flannery is very much doing a self-portrait of that girl at 13 we saw earlier. No one is smiling, not even the sun, and the father is now emaciated. So I think this is the year or soon after the year they moved to Savannah, and her father has now been diagnosed with lupus, and she is watching him waste away. Again, think of the attic. So one of the things in the Emory Archive that I fell in love with were these images of lonely houses, and I was so delighted when Rosemary sent me the next image, which shows that this too was an obsession, because not only do you see this house, again, these are all done on wood. Underneath it there's a house, and it looks to me like there is another house under that. So we see this house that is residing in her imagination as a child, and probably becomes something that she's thinking about as she writes The Violent Bear It Away, for example. But we see this darker turn. In college, she's going to write a poem about this time that she titles I Gummed It Up, and later she crosses that title out and titles it Renaissance. She says, "At 12, I said I'd go my way alone, unhampered by the inert damps of love. At 12, I vowed and stood my ground and won. At 12, my task was almost done. At 13, just begun." So she's detailing this passage that she's going through. That was 13. A year later, she's 14, and in a high school assignment, she writes what she calls an explanation, so I'm going to enlarge that for you. "I am only 14 years old, but I feel that I need to bring literature into being. I have been told I have the knack for expressing myself, and so I turn my hand to writing." And she's been doing this her whole life. She's been writing all of these little books. This one, it has such a funny title, but it has a really sort of poignant backstory, because this was the birthday card she made for her father's last birthday. Why I chose Heart Trouble, The Priceless Works of M.F. O'Connor, How to Destroy Kittens, and The Proper Care of Children. But then in 1941, so the year she turned 16, it's the year Pearl Harbor is bombed, and it is the year that her beloved father dies. And here she is at that age. I feel like her hair looks like it's on fire. And she makes her most valiant attempt to date to bring literature into being. She sends this work to Viking. She sends it to Macmillan. There are wonderful rejection letters and responses from her in the archives. But when none of that is successful, she actually hand winds this copper wire and punches these holes to create this book. And again, an instance of obsession. She copies it out 10 times. There's copies of this at both GSCSU and at Emory. Anyway, there's a lot to be said about this book. But it's a story of a real goose, Herman, and Herman is leading this little parade now of geese. And I'm just going to very briefly take you inside the story. So here's how the story goes. She says, "Herman was a mighty fowl, and we got him with the thought that he would make a fine pet goose if he acted as he ought." And he's a very good goose. He acts exactly as he ought, until they bring along these 3 perfectly respectable lady geese as potential mates, and Herman is outraged. And this is how it ends. And then one day I saw the light, the truth down to a drag, for the point of the story came to me when Herman laid an egg. And now you wouldn't know that goose if on the street you met her, because Herman ain't Herman anymore. Herman's Henrietta. And now you have this image of Herman Henrietta regarding her egg. And I think this is sort of Flannery O'Connor's symbol. It's this thing, when the way she talks about symbols, it's this object in the concrete that points to some invisible truth. So in college, looking back on this year, this watershed year in her life, and you can see at the beginning it's this college journal. She's keeping track of her grades. She writes this: "The reality of death has come suddenly upon us, and the power of God has broken our complacency like a sharp arrow in the side." And I love that she crosses that out and searches for something more violent, a bullet in the side. A sense of the dramatic, of the infinite, of the tragic has descended upon us, filling us with grief, but even above grief, wonder. And here's an image that I just love. Oh, there we go, sorry. From the archives, I think the same age, and she's holding forth this little quail, and she looks like somebody in grief. Also looking back on this year, she wrote this poem, and I want to read it to you. She says, "The people passing, the centuries die within me as I grow, some natural deaths and imperceptible, some ripped by contact with immediacy, struggling and shouting not to go, and yet with all the noise they make, people passing never know. Not even when I bring the scales and say, I lost a century today." And I think that the century she lost in 1941 plays out in every single one of the revelations, the transformations that she stages in her fiction. It is that century that we feel in all those moments of revelation. So I just want to leave you with this thought that the reason we're coming to O'Connor still at age 99, next year age 100, is because we're seekers. And I think the impulse behind being an artist and being a scholar is the same one, that we are trying to find a way to go forward. And in looking to her, we're looking for that way. We're looking for something that will show us that even above grief, we might have wonder.
Screen and not to what I say, but I will take that risk. But first, as you're looking at this, let me explain that what you'll be seeing are images from O'Connor's 5 personal address books that were in the archives at Emory. I'm convinced there's at least one more out there because of one person that I know she corresponded with regularly. I believe his name is Richard Allen. He was in Chicago, and he is not listed in any of her address books, so I think maybe it's in the attic. I don't know. But I'm going to start with this, and this comes from the preface of this book. The personal address book, whether stately and leather-covered or flimsy and wire-bound, is filled over the years with information. People's names, street names, cities and states, countries, phone numbers, zip codes, and more. Such a chronicle is a progressive work created over time. The first layer of entries, and I find I really need to explain to younger people who have maybe never seen an address book, okay? I was giving a reading in New Orleans, and a friend of mine's daughter, she goes, I gotta tell you what she said. totally lost here. The first layer of entries might be neat and uniform. Each stroke of a letter committed in the same shade of blue. But people move, marry, die. We remove some folk from our lives, and others pointedly remove themselves. And in their absence, we fill the gaps with new people, whether friends, relatives, or business associates. Eventually, the once orderly address book becomes a mess of scratch-outs and squish-ins, different inks and pencil leads, lines and cross-outs, X's and arrows. The book itself becomes a story told by disrupted alphabetizations, by corrections, and by the occasional odd note. I'm going to pick up on her later years. Okay,
Yes.
You basically stopped in 41. It was in 43 was the first time, by the way, that O'Connor went to New York, and she went with some adult friends, and it was very eye-opening for her. But what I'm going to talk about here is, there's so much that we know about a person, and that the information that is archived, and that could be, of course, archives in libraries at universities. There are other ways of archiving what we see on Ancestry.com. I definitely use that in this book. Other forms of, these sites that have the old newspapers. Those are old newspapers that are archived. So many, many different ways of finding information, of connecting dots. And when we connect these dots, we are fleshing out the person that we are studying. Now, I will say, basically, I'm going to start talking about the documents that I used when I found, that I found in the archives. And of course, the first ones that I think that are just so very, very telling would be the letters from Flannery O'Connor to her mother, Regina, whom she called Regina, right? In there, I learned all about the details of her first trip to New York in 1943 that I just mentioned. Other travels, her trip in 1950, I think 55, when she was in New York for a week to talk about her book, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Other travels, and then later on when she's making trips to different universities and such to do readings or give lectures, I didn't at least see any letters to her mother. She sort of stopped writing letters to her by that point because she lived with the woman, and I think she probably just enjoyed a little break from mom. Okay. And I should point out that there really aren't too many letters from Regina to Flannery that were kept. Because Regina's handwriting is very similar to Flannery, a few snuck in, but I get the impression that maybe Regina herself, unless they're in the attic, that they're really not around. So we have here, besides the letters from Flannery to her mother, we have the letters of Mariette Lee and Flannery O'Connor, and the letters that I read were at Georgia College in the archives there. Now, these letters have been studied by different people for different reasons. They like to point out the friendship between Mariette Lee and O'Connor. I believe they met in 1957 and became fast friends, okay? And then a lot of people have perused these letters looking for, all the stuff about racism that's in there. And we all have read, I'm sure, about how O'Connor and Mariette Lee would play these different roles with one another, and that O'Connor just really kind of crossed the line every now and then in her joking about racism. But I was looking at these letters, and I should say, at Georgia College, unless they have changed the rules there, you just can't go in like at Emory and other places where you can take your cell phone and take pictures of these things. At Georgia College, you have to take notes. So any letter that I found of interest, I had to write by hand. And I've got that little notebook with all those letters in there. When I was looking at these letters, I was looking for references to New York because I was writing about Flannery O'Connor's relationship with New York. Why that? Because there was not really too much mentioned. And, oh yes, O'Connor lived in Georgia, and she had lupus, so she didn't travel. She did travel, but she didn't travel as much, maybe as other people because of her illness and all. But in looking for all that, again, going through the letters, I was trying to discern what Flannery O'Connor thought of New York, her relationship with New York. Again, why the big deal about New York? Because Flannery O'Connor, mid-century, was a writer. And back then, you know, the center of publishing was New York. What I found with the letters between Mariette Lee and Flannery O'Connor was this give and take of Mariette going, come on, you can stay at my place. Come on, you should publicize your book. Come on, oh, you're going to get that award, you should come in town. She was always coming up with reasons, and sometimes she wasn't even going to be in New York herself. She was going to be elsewhere, and she was still offering O'Connor her place to stay. She said, come on, you need a break from the South. You need a break from your mother. You can come on. And O'Connor, time and again, would go, thanks, but. No, really, no, thanks, but. But why don't you come back south? Mariette Lee's brother was the president of the college, so she had a reason to come, except that time when she wasn't talking to him for a while, but she had a reason to come south, come to Milledgeville. So it wasn't Mariette Lee she was trying to avoid, because she kept saying, oh, come. She just didn't seem to care for New York. There's one particular letter that proves this more than anything. There was a time that Esquire magazine was featuring O'Connor. This was in 1963, I believe. They were talking about the literary establishment, and the person who wrote this put Flannery O'Connor in the red-hot center of the literary establishment. They were having a cocktail party to honor all the different authors who were being, featured in this particular magazine, which was a big deal. Flannery O'Connor was going to be in New York at that time. She had a layover coming back from a reading in Massachusetts, which, Mariette Lee knew about. Mariette Lee, oh, great, you can come in and you can stay with me. And she's like, no, I'm not going. But thank you. She really did not like New York. One of my most favorite artifacts that I found was Regina O'Connor's travel diary. Now, what did this tell us? First of all, Regina's travel diary was written because the cousin who was paying for the trip to be taken by Regina and Flannery O'Connor to Lourdes, France. It was the 100-year anniversary of the first sighting of the Virgin Mary at Lourdes. And she was just, really, this cousin was insistent that Flannery O'Connor go and bathe in the waters so she could be cured. Flannery O'Connor was not that kind of Catholic. She was a Catholic who went to Mass every day, was very serious about it. But she was not interested in that kind of, the miracles and things like that. Eventually, she and her mother get talked into going. And I should mention that the fees for this trip for the two of them back in 1958 was over $2,000. That's a lot of money back then. And, Cousin Kate was like, no, it's my pleasure, but just please, here are some really nice leather-bound travel diaries. Write about everything. Now, when you're a writer yourself, the last thing you want is for someone to tell you to write something, because that's what you do anyway, and it just feels like, leave me alone. And Flannery O'Connor somehow managed to be sick pretty much the whole time, so she stayed in the hotel room. You got to wonder about that, but she stayed in the hotel room, basically skipped everything. Sally Fitzgerald was traveling with them, so Sally and Regina did everything. But going back to Flannery, this travel diary that comes from Regina, because Flannery had nothing to write. Flannery typed up Regina's travel diary. And so in reading this travel diary, what you see is Regina keeps mentioning, there's nobody else around here on crutches. Mary Flannery is the only one on crutches. And she would go into detail about at the train stations, at this place, that place, and about how Flannery, on her crutches, here's a platform, you go down, then you have to go down these steps, and then you walk a piece, then you have to go these steps, and then you walk, and then you have to go, and over and over. And Regina is so very, very aware, and I can imagine if Regina's aware enough to write about this in her travel diary, I bet she kept saying to Flannery, I don't see anybody else here on crutches but you. Traveling, this was before the American Disabilities Act. And imagine that every time Flannery O'Connor flew, because she flew a few times, going down from the plane, we didn't have those nice little hallways that wind around and around that lead us from the airport to the plane. It was up and down those steps on crutches. It was amazing. Something else we have. Let me see. Oh, I should bring this up too. We have mentioned in the travel diary, they stopped off in New York first. That's where they were going to get the flight across the big pond. And so Regina wrote about, actually, she didn't say watching my daughter as a writer, but they were picked up by a limousine. And Regina finally got to meet Flannery O'Connor's agent. And then, of course, there were, she knew Flannery was meeting with her new editors because she had switched publishing houses. And well, Regina was just going to go shopping while she did that. But she was seeing her daughter being treated as a successful writer, which is really important. We have, of course, the address books, which, of course, you're seeing the images. Is that moving? It is moving? Okay, good. Yeah, I wanted y'all to see different pages, okay, the different address books and all. And of course, what I found interesting about those, of course, it's going to indicate new friendships, where people come into life, where people leave, that kind of thing. But also the way she would phrase an entry was telling. Sometimes it was the journal was the main entry, and then she mentioned the editor's name, like on the side. Or sometimes it was the person that was the main entry, and then, of course, she was mentioning the journal or publishing house on the side. So that sort of told us a little about that. Other than that, there were also little notes and notations throughout that would give us information about O'Connor. For example, on one page, I believe it's in the Brown address book, there are walking directions to Elizabeth Fenwick's apartment. Now, Elizabeth Fenwick was a writer. She was a very good friend of O'Connor. They had met at Yaddo. This was her new apartment she had with her new husband, David Way. And so O'Connor, includes different, and I actually have a photo of that in the book, includes things, take this subway, turn at this street, that kind of thing. So they're definitely walking directions from a time when she could walk easily, no crutches, the streets of New York. And then, of course, I say of course because I know it, but in the preface, I go into this odd note that is about some random invitation, the details. It's going to be at this church, there's a party afterwards at this place, that sort of thing. Again, just a note that's left in O'Connor's, again, the Brown address book. And with that, with connecting dots, what I was able to learn was that O'Connor wrote for the first time to the woman who would become her agent, asking, hey, I'm looking for an agent. You come highly recommended. She wrote that letter on the day that she was invited to attend a wedding that she did not want to witness. In the archives, in an address book. There are names throughout in these address books that lead to other information that tell us more about O'Connor. For example, Fred Darcy, who was just a fascinating person. He first wrote to O'Connor when he was staying in the mental hospital in Milledgeville. They started a correspondence. She was soon going to New York. He, as they say, eloped from the mental institution, moved to New York, and when he found out she was going to be there, he wrote this very detailed letter of all the things he wanted to show her and do with her. And by the way, you could stay at my place. I have a roommate. He'll sleep on the couch. You can have his bedroom. This was also informative. O'Connor didn't answer back with this, what kind of girl do you think I am kind of thing, or nor did she say, I really don't know you that well. She was so cool. She responded with, well, the publishers are paying for a place for me to stay because they want to be able to get in touch with me whenever they want me. So that's okay. We'll meet. We'll do something else. I bring this guy up because it's my thought here that Fred Darcy was a bit of a rebound after Eric Lankyard. If you look at the timing, if you look at the attention he was paying to her, they did meet while she was there that week in New York. The editor, Kathryn Carver, set up their rendezvous. They went to, Central Park. They met, they talked. And then after that, things take a bit of a turn. O'Connor becomes kind of maybe a mentor to him, explaining this and that. Oh, you want to make sure you put cardboard in your envelopes when you're sending stories in so they don't get messed up. And it basically becomes, I'm the writer and you're somebody who needs help getting started with writing. But before that, there seems to have been a bit of a spark. And these are the things you see in what was written. Letty Rogers was a writer that O'Connor met in North Carolina when she was speaking, in some sort of panel. Letty Rogers left North Carolina. She found out she had cancer. She stayed in New York. She stayed in one of the women's hotels in New York. And she reached out to O'Connor and said, no, you're not going to get cured. I know you're sick. You're not going to get cured in the South. Come to New York. You can stay with me. Come to New York. I know you don't know me that well, but I feel so strongly about this. Letty Rogers, like O'Connor, would end up dying at the age of 39 of illness, and her final book is published, as was O'Connor's, after her death. Edgar Moran, he's a vaudevillian. What the hell is he doing in an address book of O'Connor's? But he's in the address book. And if you do some research, you realize he was a local boy done good. He was from Milledgeville, and the connection is he had accompanied one of O'Connor's aunts when she was making a recital. She was singing, and he played the piano. From there, he moved, because of the newspaper articles about him, that he had gone, he was a musician, he was on vaudeville. He wasn't famous, He wasn't famous or anything, but he was there. And one can imagine the family, the aunts, saying to O'Connor, hey, you know what? When you're in town, look up good old Edgar. He's really nice. And then finally, just one more person, Dudley Huppler wanted to he was an artist that she met on her trip to publicize the book. He met her. He was part of Warhol's group of friends. He wanted to draw her portrait, and she said, no, draw one of my birds instead. And he did. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on this panel, to be able to listen to these presentations. And as Angela mentioned at the beginning, I was not originally scheduled to be on this panel. I'm filling in for Jessica Hooten-Wilson, so this gives me an excuse to ramble for a bit, but I'm going to keep my rambling short so that we have time for discussion. And I think what I'll do, and I'll spend a little less time on some of this than I originally planned, was I'll talk a little bit about my experience of teaching O'Connor and my earlier scholarship in relation to that, some scholarly angles, a few really specific ones that I'd be interested in undertaking myself if I had time, or if I had grad students, I would say, you go do that. But then also saying a few things about the Flannery O'Connor estate and trust, and some things that will be of interest to everybody in the future. I attended Notre Dame as an undergraduate. I was a major in the program of liberal studies here. I'm from South Carolina originally, and when I came here in the late 1980s, all my professors, who mainly in PLS, the Great Books program at that time, were philosophers and theologians, and they would all say, I had a stronger accent then than I do now, but they would all say, oh, you're from the South. You must have read Flannery O'Connor. You must read Flannery O'Connor, right? That's a little bit, so that's how I got started. And I think I didn't actually read, I was not assigned to read O'Connor at Notre Dame, but I knew I should read her. I read her on my own for a while. Afterwards, it really wasn't until I started graduate school, well, I knew I was supposed to look for theological things, right, in reading O'Connor. I knew that. But I really think I started to get O'Connor when I was in graduate school and reading her in an English program, and my experience of teaching O'Connor, I've actually taught her in different different settings. I've taught her, I was in a Catholic Studies department at DePaul University for a while, and I would teach in a course on Introduction to Catholicism. I'd do a lot of things, but it was supposed to be interdisciplinary. We would read the Displaced Person in Parker's Back from O'Connor as part of that class. So I've taught her in a lot of different settings, but most of my teaching, I'm somebody who ended up specializing in American literature. And so I am used to teaching her in the American literature classroom. And I would love to be able to teach courses just on O'Connor, and I have at certain times in the past. I've moved around, I've taught graduate level classes that have focused on her. But most of my teaching has been in undergraduate courses where I'm doing an American literature survey, where I'm thinking about her in relation to other American authors. And given time, I could talk about why I think that's an important way to understand O'Connor that most people at this conference, we haven't talked about a lot, right? Our nature is in thinking about her as a Catholic author. But for me, my experience has been setting O'Connor up by teaching Edgar Allan Poe, whom she called an influence she would rather not think about, but an influence, by teaching Nathaniel Hawthorne, whom she said she felt more of a kinship with than any other American writer, by teaching writers like Mark Twain. And so I could keep building this list and talking about how you could start with the Puritans, you can talk about some of those writers, and it's all leading towards O'Connor. But also, one of the things that continues to amaze me about O'Connor is that for somebody who lived such a short life, who was able to produce such a small body of work, she can be placed at the center of the American literary canon, right? Maybe this is obviously my take on the American literary canon, but it's all leading up to her. And then when we get there, when we get to 1964, when she passes away, there's a lot that's sprouting out from her. At this conference right this weekend, we have heard about, I haven't been able to attend all these panels myself, but writers like George Saunders, like Toni Morrison, like Tobias Wolff, like Cormac McCarthy, some I haven't heard mentioned, but Don DeLillo. If you look at DeLillo's very early stories, there's a Hayes Motes-like character running around preaching in New York City. These writers are so different from one another, right? They are Tobias Wolff, Don DeLillo, Toni Morrison, such different American writers, but all of them admire O'Connor, have learned from her, and that's one of the things that continues to amaze me about her. I am the chair of the English department at a very small liberal arts college. I don't have time to do all the scholarship I would like to do, but yeah, if I did, here's a list of writers. Kate Chopin, Willa Cather, Kathryn Ann Porter, Flannery O'Connor, Denise Levertov, Annie Dillard, Toni Morrison, Sandra Cisneros, Louise Erdrich. These are American women writing Catholicism, right? I mean, I think O'Connor is at the center of this list. She's more committedly Orthodox than most of those writers. Those writers, there's a wide range there, right? Some convert into the faith, some lapse out of it, but maybe come back into it, right? So there's a wide range there. But I think that is a really interesting list of great writers, and there's no comparable list of men in American literature, not quite as comparable a list, I don't think. So I'm really interested in Kathryn Ann Porter in particular, but I wish somebody would do more with this American women writing Catholicism thing. Two names I have not mentioned, but I'm going to say a bit about now, at least one of them, Dorothy Day and Rose Hawthorne. So I think there's a lot to be done, and this is veering a little bit less into thinking about literature per se, but more about American Catholic history, American Catholic cultural studies. O'Connor is a mid-century figure. Her relationship with Dorothy Day, I think a lot of us have a kind of superficial impression of it. I think there's a lot more to be worked out there, and I think that Rose Hawthorne could be part of that conversation. I'm curious, how many of us know the story of Rose Hawthorne converting to Catholicism and this is Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter, and she's currently a candidate for canonization, Venerable. She was named Venerable Mother Mary Alfonsa in March. How many of us know again? So maybe over half of us. But yeah, most Americans. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm amazed at how many American Catholics don't know about her. I'm amazed at how many English professors who know some things about Nathaniel Hawthorne don't know about Rose Hawthorne. But I learned about Rose Hawthorne because of Flannery, because of her talking about Nathaniel and Rose Hawthorne in her introduction to a memoir of Mary Ann. So that's a fascinating story. And I've done a bit of scholarship on that. At the NEH Summer Institute in Milledgeville last summer, I spoke a bit about Rose Hawthorne and O'Connor, and I think there's a lot there. Rose Hawthorne also inspired Dorothy Day, right? When Dorothy Day tried to start the Catholic Worker, she looked at Rose Hawthorne as somebody who had launched something very different in some ways, but gave her confidence in what she could do. So for the sake of time, I'm going to not keep talking about that because that could go on a long time, but just say a few things about the Flannery O'Connor Trust. So I have been one of the two co-executors of O'Connor's literary estate and co-trustees of the Flannery O'Connor Charitable Trust since last year. So I'm still learning a lot. My co-trustee is Father Michael Garanzini, a Jesuit who's been doing it for 15 or 16 years. So I'm the junior partner. I'm still learning, but it's an exciting time, and it's great to see all the anticipation of the coming centennial, which we've heard some things about. So I'm going to say a few things about what the trust is up to and other things I know in relation to the centennial. So Angela mentioned Karin Coonrod and the work that she's done performing O'Connor stories. This fall, within the past few months, Karin Coonrod took her troupe to Rome, did performances of Everything That Rises Must Converge there, performed several places in New York, performed at Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina, at University of St. Thomas in Houston. I know we have a lot of University of St. Thomas folks here. But the trust arranged with Karin Coonrod to film a performance in Rome. And so we now have the film. The film has to be edited, but we plan to make that available as an educational resource, which would be great for people who are interested in teaching Everything That Rises Must Converge and learning about O'Connor generally. I am on sabbatical this semester. It's a very busy sabbatical, but I'm technically on sabbatical, and I've been spending a lot of my time in Milledgeville at Georgia College. There's a lot going on there, so why might you want to make a pilgrimage to Milledgeville, right? There are lots of reasons. I'm going to tell you just a couple of things which you may not know if you haven't been there ever or if you haven't been there in a while. There's the Andalusia Farmhouse. A little over a year and a half ago, Georgia College opened the Andalusia Interpretive Center. So you can go there, take a tour of the farmhouse, and they have exhibits in the Interpretive Center where you can learn a lot about O'Connor's life on the farm. There are mannequins with dresses that Regina made for Flannery, etc. There's a lot to see there. The Green Street House, which Amy showed us slides of, when Louise Florencourt, my successor in the trust, passed away last summer, she left that house to Georgia College. So that will be transformed into another space where you could go and see where O'Connor lived when she was in high school, when she was in college. So it's going to be a while. They've got to do some renovation, but that's on the way. There is a Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Public Humanities, which is being run by Georgia College. They do a lot of Zoom talks, right, Amy and Angela, right, and Kathryn?
No, my thing is just with Andalusia.
With Andalusia, yeah.
Next
Yeah, there are a lot of different agencies that are supporting O'Connor at Georgia College. But the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Public Humanities is interested in building up for the centennial and will be a way to learn about what's happening in Milledgeville in March of next year. And so what might that be? I'm going to say more about that in a bit. One thing I've been doing while in Milledgeville is there's been a lot of talk about the archives. There were about 110 boxes of O'Connor family material that my predecessor had kept in private storage that I have been sorting through for the past 6 weeks or so, and I haven't found that address book. I am not a professional archivist. These boxes will ultimately be given to Georgia College or to Emory, right, and they will be professionally archived and cataloged, but I am taking a look through them to get a sense of what's in there. And there are some exciting things in there. Not the most exciting things. There's no unpublished novel. There's no short stories we haven't seen before. A lot of it is more extended family material, but there are materials there that will help us to understand O'Connor's relationship with her father better. These are things that will be of interest to biographers. There's a lot that will help us to understand her mother better and her mother's life after Flannery. There are books. There was a book published in 1985 called Flannery O'Connor's Library, which lists all the books that are currently held in Georgia College at special collections. Well, there are about 200 more books to add to that library, and they range from when O'Connor was a girl. Some of these books she probably owned in Savannah up until the last years of her life, and some are. I always wondered what happened to her copy of Moby Dick, which is mentioned in The Habit of Being. Well, I found it now. So, so these will be given probably almost certainly to Georgia College, where the rest of the library is. But there are annotations, and some, not in all of the books, but there are certainly annotations in books that will be of interest to scholars going forward. And last thing I'll say is that there's artwork, right? There's artwork. So people have known for a long time. O'Connor's self-portrait you can find out on the internet, but it's been known that she had paintings that were framed, that were hung in the house at Andalusia, paintings that she created herself that have not been made available to the public before, but the Trust is planning to make them available to the public. So this will include those framed paintings as well as some of the images that Amy showed us parts of that were found in the attic of the Green Street house. And nothing's 100% certain yet, but it's likely that those will be displayed at the Andalusia Interpretive Center on O'Connor's birthday, March 25th, 2025. And there will be publications, I'm sure, forthcoming in relation to that. So for the sake of time, I will, we've got like 5 minutes left, but yeah.
Coming up in connection with the, oh my goodness, in the centenary celebration, June 6th to 8th, we are, Flannery didn't like to travel when she was alive, but we make her travel. We take her internationally to various places around the world. We've taken her to Spain, we've taken her to Rome, we've taken her to Ireland, Canada. This year, we're taking her to London. So there's a call for papers, and you can see interspersed throughout the chairs if you want to just take a picture of these or take one with you. Call for papers is out there, and we would love for you to join us if you're interested in O'Connor, June 6th through 8th. In 2025 to celebrate her 100th birthday. I know we're going to all go off to Mass now, and of course it's All Souls Day, and among the souls that we're going to be praying for is, of course, our dear Sister Flannery. So I thought I would read a poem to kind of send us forth from this book that is, poems that supposedly Flannery would have written, poems in her voice. And this is one, the epigraph to this poem comes from her prayer journal, in which she says, "What I am asking for is really very ridiculous. Oh Lord, I'm saying at present, I am a cheese. Make me a mystic immediately." Flannery's prayer. Sometimes I tire of waiting for the transformation, the moment I move from milk product to holy hallelujah, halo on my head instead of rind, my smell suddenly sweet instead of sour, a rose growing amid the dairy farm of life. My mama and my proper Catholic aunts pray for rain, good weather. Won't they be surprised to learn what their odd daughter hankers for? wisdom to light on me like a pet bird pecking its feed from my open hand, vision that penetrates walls and doors that shut me up and away from your love, the stuff that cheeses like me dream of. Thanks, everybody, for your attention. We'll see you all at Mass.